Oh, hello. I didn't see you there. Today, we will be discussing this book, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn.
The Adventures of Huck Finn picks up from where the Adventures of Tom Sawyer had left off. Huck is now living with Widow Douglas, and she is trying to civilize him by taking him to church and making him go to school. Then Huck's dad suddenly comes around and messes around and abducts Huck eventually. So he keeps him in the cabin, locks him in, and beats him up all the time. You know, pretty mediocre existence. Huck eventually gets tired of this, and so he fakes his death, and then he books it over to Jackson's Island on the Mississippi River. After a while on Jackson's Island, Huck meets Jim, a runaway slave formerly owned by Widow Douglas. Jim runs away because Widow Douglas is going to sell him, and he does not want to be sold because that would suck. And the two decide to team up. They make their way down the river to Cairo, Ohio, where Jim can take a riverboat upriver and to freedom into the Free States. In the middle of a flood, Huck and Jim encounter a washed-up house floating downriver with a dead body in it. Jim tells Huck not to look at the body while he covers it. Whilst traveling downriver, the duo encounters a few other risky situations, including once where Huck disguises himself as a girl to gather local information and almost gets caught, and another where they encounter thieves on a sinking boat.
And you know what? In the end, they didn't even sail past Cairo. They missed it in an unfortunate night of fog.
Huck and Jim's raft is eventually struck by a steamboat, and the two are separated. Huck finds his way to the home of a family by the name of the Grangerfords, who are at odds with the nearby Shepperson family. Their feud escalates when one of the Grangerson girls runs off to escape with a Shepperson boy, resulting in the slaughter of many of the Grangerfords. Huck finds Jim midway through the conflict, and they leave. Sometime later, Huck and Jim take in two run-on conmen, who claim to be the Duke of Bridgewater and the Lost Dauphin, son of Louis XIV. Most essays refer to him as the Dauphin, but I'll refer to him as the King. Huck recognizes that the two are definitely lying, but Jim is completely enamored in their tale. The Duke and the King guide the group and continue to move through several towns, pretending to be a Shakespearean show or pretending to be British people in order to scam a family out of their inheritance. While traveling, the group decides to hide Jim whilst in broad daylight by dressing him in robes and painting his face blue and labeling him as a sick Arab. Super legit. After running from a botched scheme and sailing on the river for several weeks, the group sets down at a small southern village. Huck finds out that the king sold Jim for $40 for alcohol. So Huck tricks the Duke into letting him go break out Jim, who was sold off to a farmer named Silas Phelps. While making his way towards Jim, Huck is mistaken to be Tom Sawyer by Tom's Aunt Sally, who was expecting Tom for a visit. Huck plays along, as he knows Tom Sawyer fairly well. When Tom actually shows up, Huck intercepts him, and Tom willingly joins him in his plot to free Jim. Tom convinces his aunt that he is actually Sid Sawyer, his own brother, and the two set about to break out Jim. Super convenient of Tom. Huck creates a very practical plan to break Jim out by just taking the keys and breaking him out of a shed. But Tom says, nah, let's make it really complicated and unnecessary, and Huck says, okay, I guess. The two try on various complicated plots, such as digging Jim out of the shed with two knives and filling Jim's containment cabin with a bunch of rodents and insects as pets, while simultaneously terrifying Jim. In the end, their plot to convince the locals that a band of bandits was coming to steal Jim fails, but they do run off with Jim while no one is looking. Their plan works until Tom makes a noise, which results in the trio getting shot at and Tom getting capped in the leg. They flee to a nearby island, where they celebrate their escape, but then have to take Tom to a nearby doctor to get him treated because he got shot in the leg, and that kinda hurts. Then Jim is recaptured as he sacrifices his own freedom to care for Tom, because Tom is also hurt. Dang it, Tom. Tom then pulls one of the biggest jerk moves in literature, where he reveals that, surprise surprise, Jim was free the entire time. The Widow Douglas had freed Jim in her will because she had regretted ever trying to sell him. The locals apologize deeply for their mistake of capturing Jim and treat him like a king. And Jim tells Huck that he too is a free man because the dead body they had found in the sinking house before had been Huck's father. Huck decides that, wow, civilization sucks, it's too much, and he decides to venture out further into the frontier. Thus concluding the book.
Now, the book does raise several important questions, a few of which I will address here. The first of which is about choice and slavery.
Throughout the book, Huck questions the morality of himself traveling with a runaway slave and contemplates turning Jim in. I was trembling, because I'd gotten to decide forever betwixt two things, and I knowed it. Huck ultimately decides not to turn in Jim, as Jim is his friend, and Huck wouldn't want to turn in a friend, because he'd feel really bad. And also, Jim would feel bad too. One interesting aspect that the book expresses at the end is that none of the ordeals that Huck and Jim went through ever mattered in the end, because Jim had been free most of the time. They never needed to escape because Jim had been free. Some have asked, did Twain do this on purpose? Is he saying something about free choice? Do our choices really matter? Or did he just run out of time to write an ending? The world may never know. When Huck Finn was originally released in the mid-1880s, there was a massive controversy surrounding the book. The controversy was not, however, around the race relations within the book, but rather about how Huck Finn seemed as a role model to kids. People didn't want their children reading about a boy who smoked and didn't care about things and basically lived the thug life. This controversy resulted in the book being banned from a multitude of libraries and schools. Years later, around the Civil Rights Movement, another controversy came up around the book, this time centered around the use of the N-word within the book and the depictions of slavery within the book. Some argue that the word should be excluded from the book, while others argue that the book should include the word, because the word was commonly used in the time period. Now, I am more inclined to agree with the second opinion. After all, the book's a period piece. Get over it, they use the N-word.
Now, some people call Huckleberry Finn the great American novel, such as Ernest Hemingway in his quote,
"All American literature comes from the one book by Mark Twain called Huckleberry Finn. American writing comes from that. There was nothing before, and there has been nothing as good since." Some people don't agree with this statement, but others do. There are several reasons why this book can be considered the great American novel. One of them is the use of language throughout the novel. Mark Twain spares nothing from the realism of the vernacular within the novel. The unique voice and speech patterns of Huck are heard throughout the book, and other characters, such as Jim, have their unique vernacular transcribed into text as well. Another reason that some may consider this book the great American novel is through its depiction of American society at the time. Throughout the book, Huck often finds nothing but danger and deception while he's off his raft and in civilization, and as Huck observes, human beings can be awfully cruel to one another. Anyways, that's my personal interpretation on how the book depicts American society. What did you think?
Anyways, that's it for now. I'll be seeing you. And have a good one. Dang it.